Hi, and welcome to the Healing Trauma Podcast. My name is Dr. Mark McNear, and I will be with you today, filling in for Monique. Today, I am pleased to have with me J. Ashely T. Booth. Ashely, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I thought we would begin, and I would ask you to share about yourself.
So I have a little bit of a unique background in that I used to be an oceanographer and really felt a calling at some point that I recognized that we're not going to be able to heal the oceans and the animals and the rainforests until we heal people. And so I felt that my gifts and my presence could be used elsewhere. And so that shifted my career. And so in the last 8 or so years, I've been moving into the field of mental health and supporting people with trauma. And that's kind of the passion that has come out of that, from the very small little T traumas to the big T traumas. It's just a beautiful process to be able to support people in.
Yes. And so I want to move into, from you just briefly introducing yourself, to your book, Quieting the Storm Within. It is wonderful. Maybe you could tell us how that came about, what it's about, and maybe how it relates to trauma.
Yeah. So it's a little unique. I wrote a picture book and I illustrated it myself. I'm an artist kind of on the side, and that's been my passion ever since I was young. And when I got introduced to internal family systems therapy, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, I was so struck by it. And it felt so intuitive and so interesting to me. And it also felt very visual. So when I started introducing it to clients, it kind of took several sessions to try to help people conceptualize what we were talking about. Or I could give them a book, but a lot of the books were quite dense or they were based on, they were more geared towards clinicians. And some people just don't read books. So I wanted an easy way to be able to introduce the model to clients before they started therapy, so we would have a shared language. And so I decided to create that tool that I needed for my own work. And so I wrote and illustrated this picture book. It's for adults and teens, and it explains internal family systems like a kid's picture book, but it's quite nuanced, and it covers some important themes. So even though it's a picture book, it really covers a lot, really sets a foundation to be able to start the work. And I really also I wanted to meet people where they were at. The book starts with all of our troubled kind of thoughts and whatever it is that we're struggling with. And so from there takes the reader through a whole process to be able to understand more and sort of part the clouds.
Do you have it there? I think.
Yeah, so I can show it here.
Could you hold it up just so people could see?
Yeah, so it's a sweet little size. And then, I'll open it up just to like a random page here to kind of show. So it's got comic book style pictures and little characters, and it just makes it really easy to conceptualize what's going on in internal family systems.
Like that word conceptualize, because a lot of people, when you begin to explain IFS, they're not quite sure, and you're talking about these different parts, or you're talking about, different aspects of the framework of the modality. And I found people sometimes get really lost with that. So I was like, wow, this book is great. And I noticed that Richard Schwartz had endorsed it.
Yeah. He gave a really sweet endorsement.
Yeah, and he has been on the podcast with Monique, so people, I'm sure, are familiar with him. So Quieting the Storm Within. Why that title?
Well, so the metaphor that I use throughout the book, and it's one that's common in the IFS community, is that our deeper sense of self is like the sun, and the parts of us that maybe are oriented around getting our needs met and our protection strategies, they're kind of like clouds. And when we have a lot of protection strategies, lots of parts, it's like the clouds cover up the sun and we don't have access to those inner resources. And so I kind of took that metaphor and ran with it. And so I use a lot of sort of weather analogies. And so that was why I got called that. Originally, the name was The Argument Inside Our Heads, because I wanted to start where people were at. Like, there's an argument going on in my head, and how do I help with this? But this felt like still naming that we were maybe struggling with a storm, but it's more soothing, and it had the weather reference. So that was the one that won out.
Yeah, I love the title of it. Maybe we could move into, if you're comfortable with, talking a little bit about IFS for people that are familiar or people that aren't familiar. kind
Sure.
of like describe the framework? Because I find
Sure.
that, and that's why I like the book so much, because, you know, it can be confusing at times when people are first introduced to it. And I know that we have done other programs with it, but I don't think it hurts to keep reinforcing parts of this modality.
Yeah, yeah. So the example that I start the book with is that we're all kind of familiar with this scenario, maybe of like one little voice in our head looking at a donut and being like, "Ooh, I want to eat that donut," and then another voice that says, "Don't eat the donut; it'll make you fat, or it's not healthy." Right? And then there's this conflict. Right? There's two little perspectives that are in an argument in our head. And so what Richard Schwartz did, and many other modalities have sort of pointed to the fact that we have these different parts, these different perspectives. And what he did is he started talking to those parts as if they were subpersonalities and
Yeah.
finding out that they kind of are, that they have their own backstories, they have their own desires, their own needs, their own strategies, their own memories. And so, yeah, it's been kind of sad that the Western world or the Western culture has thought of ourselves as this monolith, and that we only have, one personality. Or people say, "Oh, it's my ego," right? And that we don't get the nuances when we use that kind of language. The ego is, from an IFS perspective, is much more akin to a lots of different perspectives that make up the ego, which is the structure of how we get our needs met. And so what I explore in this book is how those different parts of us, what are they in service to? Why are they doing the things that they do? Because oftentimes they seem like they're being very sabotaging, right? I want to go to the gym, but another part of me is just going to sit on the couch and eat ice cream, right? Why am I sabotaging myself?
Yeah.
And it's very confusing, and people start to hate themselves or think that that lazy part of themselves is the one that's their real self.
Yeah.
And so when we start to see and get curious about those different parts, we start to say, "Hey, what are you actually in service to?" And maybe when we ask the one that wants to sit on the couch and eat ice cream, it's like, "I'm overwhelmed. I need to regulate myself, and eating ice cream and just relaxing is what's going to soothe my nervous system because I'm just too dysregulated." Right? So it's actually in service to regulating ourselves. It may not be the healthiest way of regulating ourselves, but that is what it's trying to do. So when we get curious, we find that all these parts and these protective strategies have a benevolent intent behind them. They may be using outdated strategies, but the intent is good. So that's kind of one big piece of it. And then the next big piece of it is that when Richard Schwartz started asking, okay, there's the part that wants to sit on the couch and eat ice cream. Can that one step to the side a little bit and see who else is here? Okay. And then there's the one that wants to go to the gym. Okay. Can that one step aside? And he kept asking, okay, step aside, step aside, step aside. And then eventually people would say, well, that's the perspective of I'm in now isn't a part. It's just me. And when he got to that place, he started to be curious about the qualities of what people were calling that like deeper sense of self. And he started calling it the self with a capital S. And he noticed that all people seem to have similar qualities when they're in their self. And so he calls those qualities the 8 C's. So there's compassion, clarity, calm, curiosity. So that becomes this really interesting healing force and resource that people get when they start to get access to that. That becomes more the therapist in the room than maybe an IFS therapist would. And so for a lot of people, thinking that they have a benevolent core is a bit of a big ask, especially if they've been hating themselves, and often in trauma, we have self-hatred or self-blame or all sorts of things. And we think that maybe our deepest self is darkness. So that's why I try to start the book from the parts perspective and then slowly introduce the concept of the self. And it may take a long time for people to be able to, their protective parts to be able to make space for that self to reveal itself. But that's the process of IFS therapy.
So I want to go a little bit further with this and ask you, Ashely. So you are, or I am, sitting on the couch, and I'm going to go back to the donut. And say,
it's a good one.
So I look at the donut and I'm in this dilemma because, there's part of me that says that would taste so good. And then there's another part that says, like, what is the matter with you? You're trying to lose weight. And from that, let's say that I decide to eat the donut.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm feeling really good for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I pass a mirror and I say to myself, like, what is the matter with you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are
Mm-hmm.
you such a jerk? Or I realize what I've done and I go get the other 11 donuts. What's going on there?
Yeah. Yeah. So we call that kind of dynamic a polarization, which means there's
Mm-hmm.
two different parts that are essentially advocating for different needs. And that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I really point to in the book that's maybe a little bit more unique than
Mm-hmm.
other approaches to IFS, because I adore nonviolent communication. And so much of nonviolent communication is having people help them understand what their need is that's underneath their feelings. And how I see our parts is that they are all guardians or voices, or it's just essentially trying to get our needs met. So what I would
Yeah.
be bringing to a client that brought something like this to me, I would say, let's get curious about what both of those parts are advocating for and what are they both needing. Because I'm hearing the one that eats the donut or the 11 donuts is really getting vilified here. And it is sabotaging this other need, which is to stay healthy or to stay thin, And so I would ask, hey, the one that's been quite critical, would it be open to us being curious about what's going on there so that we can understand why it's
Mm-hmm.
doing this compulsive behavior? And usually those critical parts will get on board and we
Yeah.
can kind of ask them to step back a little bit so that we can have a neutral space without
Mm-hmm.
criticism to be curious about this one. Because once we start listening, typically find out that this part, right, the ones to eat the donuts, is like feels terrible about itself. It's always
Mm-hmm.
being criticized. It's overwhelmed. It has poor self-esteem. And to be able to counteract some of those feelings of overwhelm
Yeah.
is to be able to eat sugar and donuts, because
Yeah.
that releases chemicals in our body that make us feel calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, it's kind of that the more that polarization gets exacerbated, right? The more criticism there is, the more this one is going to feel bad about itself, the more that it's going to want to eat more donuts to make it feel
Mm-hmm.
better. And
Yeah.
so then it's just, they keep getting more and more escalated in both of the behaviors. And so then what we would start to see is like, okay, so you are trying to self-regulate with the donuts. You're trying to calm yourself, feel less overwhelmed. So I wonder, so then it would be kind of sitting with whatever those feelings are, right? And
Yeah.
where does
Yeah.
this come from? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, when I was in middle school, kids would tease me because that I was fat,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you go back to some of those memories and being able to be present with them
Mm-hmm.
and go through the process of unburdening, which we can get into if we want, but that's sort of the process of relieving the systems of kind of negative emotions that they've been holding on to from the past,
Mm-hmm.
belief systems that aren't really true anymore, like, oh, I'm a fat, lazy person or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to loosen the tension around that system. And with that kind of greater understanding, there's less animosity between all of those parts that,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this part's just trying to help me feel less overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can start to see, okay, well, maybe there's some other tools here and other ways that we can help you feel less overwhelmed. And then there's some more possibility there when we've actually gotten down to what the need is, and
Mm-hmm.
that we've also addressed some of the pent up feelings that have caused tension in the system.
Would you say that internal family systems or IFS is a more gentle approach than some of the approaches for people with trauma?
Yes. Yes. So what I love about internal family systems is that it's very non-pathologizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying, well, we really need to get that behavior of yours under control, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just exacerbating the critic, right, in the system. And it's not listening to our most wounded parts. And so instead of, I can't tell you how many times I talk to clients about this every time, but it's like, they'll be like, well, I just need to stop doing that behavior. And it's like, actually, what we're going to do here is do kind of the opposite of that, which is not try to ignore the thing, but to turn right towards it and say, what's going on here? What need is this advocating for that? And how do we be curious about it? In a very neutral way, because they're all of our core human needs. And so for trauma, a lot of those needs are around safety, security, regulating the nervous system. And so we can continue to be curious about the belief systems that are involved in each of those parts in a way that that allows us to step a little bit apart from that part rather than having it being completely blended with us. So if a part believes, well, I'm worthless, nobody wants me, it's my fault, or guilt, or any of these things, we can step back and say, that part of you really believes that strongly. Let's get curious about that, rather than saying, negating that, or, which is often what we have other parts that are trying to do. Stop thinking about that, right?
Which doesn't work.
Right? Because if you have something that if there's a need that's trying to be met and it's not getting met, it's just going to keep talking louder and louder and louder.
Yeah. So I found a quote of yours that's, my passion is fostering people's connection to a deeper sense of themselves. And it definitely sounds like IFS, and I've done it myself with IFS. It does bring you a clearer connection, but could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. In this process, like I was saying earlier, often people, especially that have had trauma, have some deep belief systems, right? Some parts that are very dominant in their system have beliefs that I'm bad, it's my fault, I'm dirty, I'm, no good, all of these kind of negative belief systems. Yeah. So often they think that that's who they really are in the deepest way. See that these are actually a complex system of parts, and it makes more space. Even before we even get to the self, people start to say, that part believes that, and I also have another part that believes something else. I'm not this monolith. I'm not completely all bad, making air quotes as I say that. And so it makes a little bit of space for other perspectives and other ways of looking at something. And then, and the more you do the work, the more people get in touch with that deeper sense of self, which that is a deeply moving experience, to be able to feel into that. And my role as a therapist is to manage, to keep track of all of my parts so that I'm showing up in a therapeutic setting as much as I can in my self energy, to be able to be the light of those qualities, even when maybe a client isn't able to access that yet. And then as they move into that, then they can start doing that for themselves.
So would you say that one part of this, or a large part of this modality, is also awareness? And tuning in.
Yeah, it's to get curious. And that's one of the 8 C's, and that's often the one that we're able to access first. And so we can use that curiosity to start to say, what's going on here? Right? Without, what can we learn here when we're not jumping into maybe a narrative that another part has about this part, right? And just to say, without the narratives, what's going on here? What is the feeling that's happening? Can we just make space for that feeling to be felt for a moment, or just even a 10% of it, because we want to make sure people don't get overwhelmed. So, and that's the other piece that I love about IFS. It's so consent oriented. And how I mean that is that if I'm going to talk to one of the parts and another part's like, don't talk to that part. If you talk to it, it's going to release all of this grief. And then we're just going to be completely overwhelmed with grief forever, or the next week. And we're not going to be able to come back from that. And so this, this other protector is trying to keep the grief down so that person can function. And I'm like, okay, I understand, we can understand that you don't want this person to feel overwhelmed. That's kind of the base thing. The grief, like, what if we could explore and see what that grief has to share, but just do it in like 5-10%, not let the whole thing out, just a little bite-sized piece so that we can start to learn, because there's something here that is not healing, right? It's stuck in a frozen process. And for it to be able to move and process through, we do need to look at it. But let's do it in a really small way. And if you have, if it starts to feel overwhelming, just wave your hand or throw up a flag and we'll stop. And so usually when you go at that pace and offer a lot of understanding, consent, informed consent, right? A lot of protectors want to know about the process. Well, what's the point of feeling that grief? It feels terrible, and it's going to, why would we want to do that? And so some of it's psychoeducation.
So there's like that issue, and I love that in IFS, that issue of like titration, that people don't have to go, from 0 to 100, but they can look at one part of that feeling, or 10% of that feeling. I love that.
Yeah. And we just go extra slow. I love this quote, and I can't remember who it's by at the moment, but it's like, let's move at the speed of trust. And that's so important with trauma work, because trauma is too much too fast. So trauma healing is a little bit slowly. So that means we need to go and be like, okay, how do you feel now? How do you feel now? How do you feel now? And sometimes that can be, at odds with other parts of people that are like, I want to feel better right now. I wanted to feel better yesterday. Like, how do we speed up this process? And so there's some negotiation that has to happen, because the work actually happens faster when we move slower.
Say that again.
The work actually happens faster when we move slower.
I love that. So is there work that with IFS that people can do outside of the session?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I designed the book to it has a couple of exercises in it that people can do themselves. Mm-hmm. And so while the deeper healing work of really getting into those deeper wounded spaces might be something that it would be more appropriate to do with a trained IFS provider, people can start to learn about their parts and start to kind of map them out. Like, okay, I have this inner critic over here and its qualities are like this. I have, this part of me that feels like a child when I get triggered, right? And you start to map them out. And then that allows a level of awareness building that when you're moving through the world, you're starting to notice, I'm in that part right now. That trigger happened. Yep, there's that part again. And now the other part tries to come in and shut it down, and you're just building more awareness. And when you're able to name the part, maybe you're not able to name it right away, but maybe in a little bit, you're like, oh, wait, I'm in that part. Get some space from it. And then there might be other possibilities of being able to react differently.
So I want to ask you, in your work with people, what have you learned, or people that what have you learned about trauma?
It's such a spectrum, and that no matter how extreme someone's trauma is, it's like we all experience some wounds. And so no matter them being small wounds or very big wounds, but there are kind of an almost fixed number of ways that people respond to those wounds. And so we can kind of be curious about how can we, okay, that's a particular way that a logical way at that time made sense to do that kind of thing. And that's why that person responded that way. And I see most mental health work through the lens of trauma, whether it be considered, diagnosable PTSD or not. It's when we've had an unmet need that is unmet at a critical time in our life when we really needed it, and that there's no resolve. And so, and then the other piece that, I hold this torch for any client that I work with, even though it's a hard sell early on, but that there is post-traumatic growth that can happen afterwards. And that when we move through, there's a way to create meaning, right? Because a lot of trauma is around meaning making, or the confusion around meaning, and to be able to start making empowering meaning that ends up actually fueling people to do beautiful things in the world. Like, a friend of mine shared something with me related to this that really struck home for me, because he was sexually abused when he was young, and he's gone through a very long healing process. And now he's like, I actually see the gift in what happened to me. Not that I condone it, but I see the gift because now I have instilled in me an advocacy to help people that are innocent or are taken advantage of. And now that is my life's work. I'm helping others. And so it's this interesting thing. And when you pull back to that kind of perspective, it becomes something that's, dare I say, beautiful. Obviously it doesn't feel beautiful when we're in the deeps of the darkness, but it's possible to get through.
And to grow.
And to then have something beautiful to share or
Ashely,
appreciate about yourself.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's it.
Ashely, I really appreciate this time. It's been wonderful. I'm wondering if people are listening to this or watching this and are interested in connecting with you or finding out more about you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So my practice website for I do consulting work and trauma work. And my website is ashleybooth.net. So ASHLEYBOOTH.net. And then if you're looking for the book website is ifsandbeyond.com. The book's also available on Amazon, and on the website, I have, because the characters are so cute. Part of it was I wanted to make something cute. So I also started making some cute little characters and putting them
Oh,
on the
neat.
mugs.
Yeah.
And so I'll describe what the mug is, but there's on one side that it has a little sunshine that says today's a self-care day. And on the other side is like a sweet little cute part that's being held by some hands. And
That's
so it's just
wonderful.
like little reminders that people can have to be in themselves or to take care of themselves. So I have those kinds of things on the website too, just because it's fun.
Ashely, thank you for that, and thank you for this time.
Yeah. It's been lovely. Hope this people get some inspiration from this and curiosity.